Episode number 171 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. My guest today is Annina Burns. Annina is a registered dietitian with a PhD from the University of Oxford in the UK, where she was a Marshall Scholar. Annina was the first PhD RD in America to be certified in functional medicine. She was the Associate Director for Michelle Obama's Let's Move Childhood Obesity Prevention Initiative at the White House and has a passion for improving the health of families. So welcome to the podcast, Annina.
Thank you for having me.
So Annina and I had worked together in the past, and I'm really excited to be talking to you actually about your new endeavors. And you've also been through the fertility journey, and I'd love for you to share your story and also your background and how you work with women today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I really appreciate it. So my name's Annina Burns, and I'm the founder and CEO of Simplina. And I started Simplina to help couples get the nutrition and lifestyle care they need to get healthy, to get pregnant. And I did that after 9 years of private practice experience in women's health. So I worked on a range of issues, and I just found through my own fertility struggles and watching my patients that there was really a gap in the healthcare model in terms of how do you actually improve your health to increase your fertility? And people were looking for answers, but they didn't necessarily have a place to go. And that's what Simplina is. It's virtual functional medicine coaching that provides nutrition and lifestyle change that's personalized to the couple to improve their health, to increase their chances of getting pregnant.
So you worked with women, but now you work with couples. You specialized in women's health, but now you work with couples like both.
That's right. So I have both the couple on camera. And if people are going for pregnancy on their own through IVF or sperm donor, then I work directly with them too. So everyone is welcome in my practice.
Awesome. Yeah, it's important because sometimes people specialize specifically like on one or the other, but it's nice to know that both couples can come in and get help and at least know where to go because what to do because a lot of people don't know where to get started.
That's right. And it's hard to find it because there's not a place in our healthcare model. That was my experience. Like I went to the OBGYN, I said, I'm having trouble getting pregnant. And she said, just go right to IVF. I said, is there any other option here? Like, do you want to
Hmm.
do some testing
Right.
about health? And she said, no, just go to IVF. And so many of the people I talk with have the same experience of like, where else do I go to get answers that are also personalized for me? Because you can find stuff online, but it might not be the right thing for your body or the situation that you're in.
Exactly, which is such an important point that I'm really happy you brought up. You can find so many things online, but your specific body, like I love this saying, one man's food is another man's poison because everybody is so unique and different. So let's talk about why it's so important to customize specifically and like what impacts people can have by going through like a fad diet or something that really doesn't help their bodies.
Right. So, I mean, the key thing when you're trying to get pregnant is to really be in the healthiest place. And that's both for the male and the female, which is why I see couples or, really trying to improve the sperm health and the egg health, because it is both. It's
Hmm.
not just on the woman,
Yeah.
but your whole body needs to be in a healthy place mentally, emotionally, and physically. And if you do something like a fad diet or a crash diet, I see people who want to lose weight, but dropping a lot of weight can actually really deplete your nutrient stores, and those
Hmm.
nutrients are needed to get pregnant and stay pregnant. So you can actually hurt your chances of getting pregnant and staying pregnant by doing something like a fad diet or a crash diet, where you cut out a lot of nutrients that are really essential for the body. And that's why it's so important to get good nutrition counseling that's personalized to what your health needs are.
And another thing that's pretty like is become very popular is intermittent fasting. And I know that a lot of the studies that were done were really done on men most of the time. So like they don't interact with intermittent fasting the same as women. So how can that impact a woman's hormones, for example?
That's actually a really good point because I have a couple couples right now. They were doing intermittent fasting, and I pulled them off intermittent fasting because they're trying to get pregnant. Um, Intermittent fasting, just as a background, what that is it means you're fasting 12, 13, 14 hours a day and you're not eating. It works well for weight loss. And as you point out, rightly so, Michelle, is that most studies in general have been done in men. They haven't been done in women. So you have menstrual cycles, you have hormonal change. And certainly if you're trying to get pregnant, that's a whole different process than if you're a guy who's trying to lose weight.
Hmm.
And so those results are different in terms of what you're looking for. For women, though, blood glucose impacts your hormones. So every time you eat, your body releases insulin. You actually, in order to absorb the food, your blood glucose comes out, it goes up, it goes down. There's this entire cascade of things that happen. And that's why we often feel hangry or unhappy when we go long periods without eating, because that blood glucose gets really, really low. And your
Hmm.
body's trying to tell you, like, you need to eat.
Yeah.
And for hormonal balance, you do not want to have a long period in when your body's at a high stress point, because ultimately, when the blood glucose goes low for a long period or goes super high, say you've been fasting and then you eat this humongous meal and you
Hmm.
shoot your blood glucose up, that releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and you release more than your body needs. So, therefore, you get inflammation, and that inflammation impacts your hormonal balance and ultimately your cycles. So, we do know that women who don't follow regular dietary patterns are more prone to crash diets,
Hmm.
have irregular menstrual cycles, and that impacts ovulation and your ability to get pregnant, but also have a healthy pregnancy.
Right. Absolutely. And what happens, what have you seen, like, when people skip breakfast? Because I know that that's like a huge thing, skipping breakfast or having something that's just too high carbs just for breakfast and not adding proteins and fats.
Right? So your body really was meant to start the day strong, right? You're coming off a fast overnight and you need to have the energy to suddenly use all that mental power that you use for work and to get through the day. If you fast or if you skip breakfast, you start in a deficit. And so
Hmm.
your body starts pulling from your stores.
Right.
Pulls from your muscle, ultimately will pull from bone too, and your blood glucose goes really low. That creates high cortisol, which creates inflammation and also depletes your nutrients.
Hmm.
So you end up starting a day. Those people who often don't eat breakfast or my clients who have not been eating breakfast because they've been intermittent fasting and they're not eating till lunch feel so much better when they eat breakfast. If you start breakfast with a good source of protein,
Hmm.
you really need protein in the morning. It levels that blood glucose, it levels that cortisol, it balances those hormones and gives you that steady energy you need to start the day. Otherwise, your day is like a zigzag, up, down, like the stock market, up, down,
Yes.
up, down. And you've got to do a lot of other things during the day, but your body is simply trying to cope from what it started its morning. And that's just not a good place to start health wise.
And as far as timing goes, I mean, there's so many different opinions on how often we should eat. Should we have three large meals? Should it be smaller meals and in between or smaller snacks? Like, what is your opinion on that?
So my opinion is that you don't want to just be snacking and grazing. When you eat, you eat.
Hmm.
But our bodies generally do better having slightly smaller meals more frequently because
Hmm.
that balances the blood glucose. So I talked about sort of the stock market up, down, which happens if you go 7, 8 hours and then you have this massive meal or this super sugary high carb snack because you just really need food. And that's the correct reaction if you've done that to your body, but it's not what is good for your body. Whereas
Hmm.
if you eat, I have my clients eat breakfast, they eat a mid-morning snack, they eat lunch, they eat a mid-afternoon snack, and they eat dinner, balances that blood glucose like a gentle wave. You think
Hmm.
of like the ocean, just gentle in and out. And that way you get that regular sustained energy without that extra stress hormone added, without the extra inflammation. But the key is that's not grazing. That's not potato chips on your desk.
Right.
That's like it's 10:30, it's snack time. Let's have some yogurt and almonds.
Hmm.
2:30 in the afternoon, we're going to have some carrot sticks with some hummus. It's
Hmm.
you're going to have protein for those snacks. You're going to have some fat, and it's going to be at a set time where you eat and you focus on eating. You're not just running in the car, just popping whatever you can find.
Yeah, absolutely. Mindful eating. It makes such a difference. Because you
It
don't
does
even
make a difference.
acknowledge like when you're full when you don't pay attention to it.
Right. No, it's really true. And they actually studies show that you increase your absorption of the food when you mindfully eat. When you think about chewing the food, you're
Hmm.
conscious of what you're eating. I think we've all done this situation where you're watching TV and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
the whole bag of potato chips is gone. What happened?
like exactly. I
And
was
that's
totally
mindless
unconscious. Yeah,
eating. But
absolutely.
mindful eating, you eat less, you're more attuned, but you actually absorb your food better, which is a extra bonus.
Totally. And then do you also do food testing? And what have you, do you find that there's certain foods that a lot of people that are very like big foods that people tend to be sensitive to?
Yeah, I mean, I do find that gluten and wheat, a lot of people are sensitive to, and dairy. It doesn't mean you have to cut it out for everybody,
Hmm.
but often a lot of people who are having trouble with digestion, having allergies, autoimmunity, if you remove some of these big foods, you can, and you need to replace the nutrients that you lose. That's the key thing. You don't just remove something. They will digest foods better and they actually feel better. And certainly the sugars, having extra added sugars, high fructose corn syrup, there's really no need for it in the body. And reducing the sugars makes almost everybody universally feel better.
I know that is pretty amazing. And then talk about why it's important to remove things that you're sensitive to. How can that impact digestion of important foods?
It's inflammation. So it gets back to that whole thing. If you're sensitive, and we're all sensitive to different things, and increasingly, um, you know, our food products make us more sensitive, the way that they're grown and processed and so forth. But if something bothers you, it's inflaming you.
Hmm.
And you might just notice you get a headache or a stuffy nose or different symptoms, a rash in some cases, but your stomach is really inflamed. And when your stomach and your gut is inflamed, then you don't absorb the nutrients very well. And it doesn't absorb other nutrients that come in after the other foods that you eat very
Right.
well. And then you become depleted in nutrients. And all those nutrients are so important for just, everyday health, but also for fertility. It's a double, you need
Yeah.
those extra nutrients, right? You can't afford to lose and to have your body in an inflamed state. And you're far less likely to get pregnant, but you're just less likely to be healthy when your body is inflamed.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about too, just when the body doesn't get the nourishment it needs, I mean, for example, like on the other extreme, hypothalamic amenorrhea, not having enough food, not ha or exercising too much, where you're depleting yourself, then literally your period stops.
That's right. Exactly. And that's, you have that marker, but long before a period stops, there's a lot of other things that are happening that are harmful. And
Hmm.
you don't want to get to the point where a period stops. You want to make sure you can try to respond, but that is certainly a signal.
Yeah.
And many of my clients have had signals, and you talk about this too in your podcast, Michelle, all throughout their lives. But it wasn't until they tried to get pregnant that it was like, oh, maybe those signals actually mean something.
Yeah. Yeah, so our bodies, yeah, they totally talk to us. So what's your suggestions in figuring out or uncovering what foods to avoid or how to figure out what you're sensitive to?
So I've honestly found that an elimination diet is the best way to do it. It's
Hmm.
cheap, it's efficient. With food allergy testing, it can reinforce what we find in an elimination diet, but I like the elimination diet because anybody can do it. It's tough to do it, but it's, free.
Yeah,
And it also allows you to be attuned to your own sensitivities versus a
right.
lab test telling you, well, there's no rash, so you can eat this. When in
Hmm.
fact, you might notice when you add gluten back in, you feel very fatigued. And a
Yeah,
lab isn't necessarily going to tell you that,
right.
but you know that. And so it allows my clients to be attuned to what their own health needs. So what we do is we do an elimination for 3 weeks,
Hmm.
and then you add one problematic food back in at a time. So you add gluten in for a few
So you
days
eliminate
before
what?
you
What do
add.
you eliminate
So
for
I
people
eliminate
listening?
dairy,
Hmm.
gluten, eggs,
Hmm.
soy.
Okay.
So those are the four things, and then added sugars and caffeine. If I can get the client to do that. So
Hmm.
those are the big kind of culprits in terms of food allergens. And then if there's something, if someone tells me green peppers have always bothered me, we take that out too.
Okay, got it.
You've got to be eating something.
Whatever like is already you already kind of know.
you have a hunch on, because often when you add something back after several weeks, you really get a reaction versus just slowly getting it day to day and you don't notice, wow, I really don't feel good because it's your norm. When you
Right.
eliminate something and you add it back, you're like, oh, this really doesn't feel very good.
I've seen that with gluten. A lot of my patients with gluten, they take it out and then they go to like a cruise for a weekend and they come back, they're like, "Oh my God, I feel horrible." Like it really impacted my body in ways that I couldn't imagine. And you had mentioned fatigue as being one of them. A lot of times people won't think or attribute fatigue to be a food sensitivity response because they think of food sensitivity as like, oh, well, when I eat it and I don't get bloated, they think that that's the only way to measure that.
Right. And it's just a scale of things. Like we talked about kind of losing your period, but long
Hmm.
before you lose your period, there's just some other symptoms that happen. It's just being
Right.
attuned to that. So we don't want to have a rash or closing throat or redness all around your tongue.
Right.
But there are other things that tell you before you get there, usually,
Exactly.
that
It
you
doesn't have
are
to be
sensitive.
severe. Yeah.
Right.
And then some food, which is one of the reasons I always tell people to have a lot of variety in their food, is sometimes you could become sensitive just by eating too much of one thing.
That's right. I mean, I think in modern times, we often end up eating a lot of the same foods. We don't really
Yeah.
eat the variety that we think we do because we like carrots, we like apples, and those are our two go-tos.
Hmm.
And then when you remove foods, you really realize, like, I literally had a client too that loves apples. She removed them because she thought she had an itchy throat, but she wasn't sure.
Hmm.
And lo and behold, she got a very itchy throat after removing them and adding them in 3 weeks. And it's that knowledge. But if you just eat them as your default, it's hard to know what you're sensitive to.
Yeah, absolutely. So you basically remove it for 3 weeks, and then
That's correct.
you slowly add one back at a time and see. So one at a time, then remove it, then another one, then remove it, then so it's just really focusing on one that you keep adding to your diet.
Right. If you add everything back at once, we don't know, was it the eggs? Was it the wheat?
Yes.
Was it the dairy? And so, like you said, we add wheat back and gluten. And then when we take that back out, we add the eggs, we take the gluten back out. It's not gluten plus eggs because it
Right.
could be the gluten that was still bothering you and you think it's the eggs. And my ultimate goal as a nutritionist and a dietitian is I want people to eat good food and a variety of foods. I
Hmm.
don't think very restrictive diets are helpful. But
Yeah.
if there is one thing that's bothering you, we want to make sure we take that out, but we don't take out too much stuff that's unnecessary.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that a lot of people have actually done really well with I know this really seems very difficult to do, but autoimmune paleo, what are your thoughts on that? Because some people swear by it, but it's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I get with the paleo diets, I'm a little skeptical just because, our bodies were not meant to have this mega dose of protein,
Hmm.
and carbohydrates have their place. They've been the enemy kind of at certain
Yeah, it's
points
true.
in
We go to
history.
extremes, right? As like society.
Right. So there was, the Atkins and, South Beach and no carb, and then it kind of came back, now all these years later with paleo. And what we show with paleo is, people can lose weight, right? So again, if you're someone who really struggles with losing weight and that is your only goal, you are not trying to get pregnant and you do not have other health issues, you do not have kidney issues, then doing the paleo diet for a limited amount of time
Hmm.
can be helpful. Same thing with autoimmune. If you have a severe autoimmunity and nothing else is working, just getting all those allergens out and keeping that blood glucose really constant, which is what paleo does well, right?
Hmm.
And we can do that with carbohydrates. It's just harder to do.
Yeah.
It's easy to read a book and say, okay, cut all the carbs, and you keep that blood glucose with talk about the waves at constant level, then your body's not inflamed. And in an autoimmunity, inflammation is the enemy. And
Right.
inflammation is the enemy for a lot of diseases, but in autoimmunity, you really notice it. And so people feel better and they stick with it. The problem is long term, there are certain nutrients that are only in carbohydrates. We
Right.
also show mental health isn't very good if you just have a high protein diet long term. Actually, people are more likely to have depression,
Hmm.
and that's problematic as well. I mean,
Right.
carbs are your first source of energy for the brain. The
Yeah.
brain does need them, but it needs good carbs in the right quantity. And too many of us eat too many carbs because if we look around us, that's what's available and that's what's cheap.
And also, what are your thoughts on nightshades for autoimmune conditions?
So I think for autoimmune conditions, nightshades, which are tomatoes, eggplant, white potatoes, it's a certain family of veggies, can be problematic and they can trigger more autoimmunity. The good thing about eliminating nightshades is you can get lycopene from other sources, right? So
Mm-hmm.
lycopene's in tomatoes, but you can actually get it from a watermelon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's less elimination than eliminating all carbs. So I
Right.
think eliminating nightshades could be fine for, autoimmunity and for fertility, as long as you're getting those nutrients from other sources.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, because you hear so many different things, and I use nutrition in my work, but it's not my main focus. And so I learn and I hear about like certain things that people are sensitive to, but what I find is the more you learn, the more conflicting information you get. And so many people have so many different ideas when it comes to food. It's like hard to sift through fact and fiction.
It is. I mean, there's a lot of opinions out there, but ultimately, everybody's body is different.
Yeah,
And that's why I use personalization in my practice. I do genetic testing. I
right,
look at your labs. I look at your own clinical history, because what works for one person doesn't
right.
work for another person. And
True.
that's where good clinical care is often needed when you're struggling with something like autoimmunity or fertility, because you need that personalization of what's right for you, and you don't just haphazardly start eliminating stuff that could be beneficial to your body.
Right. And what kind of genetic testing do you do? And what are the benefits of that?
Yeah, so I look, the common one for fertility is MTHFR, but I look at
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of genetic SNPs and nutrigenomics,
Mm-hmm.
because that could really play an impact into how you absorb certain foods. So, with MTHFR, you don't absorb conventional folate and B vitamins. You
Which is
actually need
folic
a
acid. So if you
methylated
see it in
form,
folic acid form, yeah.
right? Folic acid or folate on the side of the bottle,
Or
that's
even
the
B12,
synthetic
right?
form. And B12 is methylcobalamin. You need an adenosyl or hydroxycobalamin.
Mm-hmm.
And for folate, you methyl tetrahydrofolate, which is basically the broken down form.
Right.
Um, and so this is really important for fertility. We find that, over about 40 to 60% of the population has an MTHFR SNP.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say in my client base, it's like 90, 95%. And those are people struggling with fertility, because folate and your B vitamins play a crucial role for fertility. So that's one example of one genetic SNP I test for, but I test for a range of genetic SNPs, some to do with cardiovascular disease, like
Mm-hmm.
COMT. Now, like it basically looks at how your body individually absorbs different nutrients. We all have deficiencies. We all have a different genetic makeup, and it's just working
Mm-hmm.
with what we have. And we have the resources to know that. It's just actually doing the testing and finding the right answer that's your puzzle piece to help you have the best health.
For sure. And I'm sure you also work with a lot of supplements too. Uh, it's important, Amy Raup always says you can't out supplement a shitty diet. It's true, but it is important to supplement once you do get like a good, well balanced diet. So what are the supplements that like are I know that it's customized. I understand that, but what are the supplements that everybody should consider taking?
Yeah, so I do think I agree. I'm a food first nutritionist.
Hmm.
You have to eat well. You can't have chocolate bars and then have a vitamin, and
Right.
you're not going to do well.
Yeah.
But when your diet is really good and you have the different components that can accent those very specific supplements, particularly if you have genetic needs for things like methyl tetrahydrofolate because you
Right.
have the MTHFR SNP. So I do think everyone should be on a multivitamin. I can't tell you the number of clients that come in and they're on everything under the sun, but not a multivitamin. I see the
Right.
multivitamin as like insurance, like
Yeah.
car insurance. It's just like the basics.
Right.
But at least you're not going to always eat every nutrient you need every day, and it gives you
Yep.
that insurance
Yeah.
there. So that's one thing that very big on. Another is I'm very big on the fats. And so like having a fish oil capsule, get your omega-3s in, that's that anti-inflammatory component because so many people come from an inflamed state. And we don't all eat fish on a daily basis. And it just gives
True.
you just kind of low dose anti-inflammatories, which I think is a really important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is, making sure that you have your B vitamins and your methylated folate. B vitamins help you fight stress. They help with the entire methylation process and how you break things down. They're cofactors for a number of different things. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a key component.
Do
And
you
the other
think
is,
that really quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think that it's good to do an extra B vitamin on top of the prenatals?
for my fertility patients, yes, because the prenatals give you that kind of base, but
Mm-hmm.
I find that they really need that extra for where they're going because the literature really shows, B6 is very helpful. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
B12 is really helpful, and so making sure that you're adequate. And I do blood testing too, so if people are very high, I wouldn't add it, but I rarely find someone who's actually very high in their B
Mm-hmm.
vitamins.
Oh, interesting. So, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
Sure. So we were going back to supplements I generally recommend. So multivitamin, or if you're trying to get pregnant or prenatal, a fish oil capsule is
Mm-hmm.
helpful. A B complex that is designed for you. So often those are methylated B vitamins for many of my clients. And a mineral supplement, actually, because it's hard to get the minerals that we need.
Mm-hmm.
And multivitamins usually don't have the adequate amount of minerals. When we think minerals, we think just calcium, magnesium, but there are other minerals that are very important cofactors as well. So manganese, boron, and so forth. So I'd like to have people on a mineral supplement. That's kind of like a base plan. And then I add on from there based on what your genetic needs are and your health needs are.
Yeah, very interesting. I think the genetics is very fascinating to really dive deep into figuring out how your body processes things based on its genetics. That's something that I think it's so amazing that we have access to now, considering, we really didn't have this kind of testing available.
It's true. It's absolutely fascinating. And it also explains why things work for one person, they don't work for another.
Right,
Um, and you could have been taking a multivitamin and you could still show up very low in folate because you actually don't have the ability to break it down from its
right.
synthetic form. And that's why. And we can figure that out and fix it. That's the
Yeah,
best thing.
totally, totally. And it's interesting too that they always enrich wheat with a lot of wheat products with folic acid, which is the synthetic form. So that's something
Right.
that I always tell people with MTHFR to keep in mind.
So do I, because it's not something that's in the back of people's
Right.
mind is
People
like
don't
you
think about
actually have
it.
to watch out for wheat based on your genetic mutation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not something that people think about. It's kind of like added vitamins that they put in there.
Right.
So thank you so much, Anina. This was great. How can people find you if they do want to work with you?
Sure. So we're at simplina.com and it's simplina.com. And you can book directly on the website. And you can contact us and we can help set up. You can do a 15-minute discovery call if you just want to see, is this the right fit for me? And I do coaching sessions. So you book a package of 8 sessions, and that really allows us to get into your health history, do the testing we need, personalize a plan and for your partner, and actually have enough time to improve egg health and sperm health in a 3-month period.
Yeah,
So that when
beautiful.
you leave the coaching program, you're in a better place, a healthier place.
That's wonderful. Well, Anina, thank you. I have all the links that Anina just mentioned on the episode notes if anybody wants to look. And thank you so much. It's great to actually have you on as a guest.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.